For the first time in a month, we're getting a look at the state of the race in Nevada. It is the next contest in the competition for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. It shows Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders with a 7-point lead over former Vice President Joe Biden. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren is sitting in third with support from 13% of respondents. On CBS This Morning today, Senator Sanders predicted victory in the Nevada caucuses and the South Carolina primary the week later.
I did win the popular vote and win the primary in New Hampshire. I think we're going to win in Nevada. I think we're going to win in South Carolina. Working people understand that we have got to finally stand up to the corporate elite and that we have to have a mass political movement of working people and low-income people and young people to do that. So I'm not worried.
Michael Starr, Hopkins, and Joseph Pinion join me now with more on the state of the 2020 race. Michael is a Democratic strategist and Joseph is a Republican strategist. Welcome to you both. Michael, let me start with you. The first two contests were in Iowa and New Hampshire, states that are 90% white. Nevada, on the other hand, is much more representative of the Democratic voter base. So how should we expect the race to evolve as we get into more diverse states?
Well, I mean, I think it's certainly going to help the more moderate candidates. I think someone like Joe Biden is going to stand a much better chance in a state like South Carolina or Georgia than he's going to in a state like Iowa at this point. But I think as we head to Super Tuesday, the real question is about donors and fundraising. Super Tuesday is going to be a really expensive day. And I think unless you have a strong base and a strong donor base, you're going to have a real problem.
And Michael, today's Morning Consult national poll shows Sanders with a huge lead among Hispanic voters. He has 48% support. Bloomberg is closest behind with 17%. Do you think that that could be what is driving him in Nevada, a state that is 29% Hispanic or Latino?
I think that's certainly a factor. Senator Sanders has made a big part of his platform talking about economic justice and tackling inequality. I think that's something a lot of Americans can relate to, especially somewhere in Nevada where there are a lot of hourly wage workers. And so I think that that's something that's really resonating with people. But I think over the long haul, the question is going to be, is Sanders able to grow his base? And so far, that hasn't been something he's really been able to do.
All right, so Joseph, I want to ask you about the candidates sort of on the moderate end of the Democratic lineup. You know, we're talking about Joe Biden, Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar. They've sort of positioned themselves as an alternative to moderate Republicans, that they might be able to win over some moderate Republicans. But when you look at the base of support for someone like Sanders and his anti-establishment message, you can argue there's some crossover with some of President Trump's support.
Well, yeah, I think when we talk about the state of affairs in American politics right now, one thing goes without question, that absolutism and populism, the fires are burning like never before. And I think that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders in many ways are two sides of the same coin. When you talk about saying that I understand your pain and I know who is there to blame. And so in the case of Donald Trump, he's talking about people who are cheating when it comes to immigration. In the case of Bernie Sanders, he's talking about the top 1% cheating when it comes to banking. So I think a lot of that fervor all derives from the same place. If there is somebody who says, I know that you are in pain and I can point to somebody and say that they are to blame, there are a lot of people who have been neglected for such a long period of time that they're willing to listen. And I think, again, we forget, as I keep telling people, that's why you had close to 10% of Bernie Sanders supporters in 2016 vote for him in the primary and turn around and vote for President Trump in the general election.
So is there room for those voters then to turn around and vote for Sanders?
Look, I think the GOP has to be very vigilant. I've said this from the beginning. I think, again, we have to remember that in some cases, Donald Trump was many voters' second choice. And when we're talking about an election decided by 78,000 voters across 3 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, really that margin is so slim that I think that, again, Bernie Sanders, people can make fun of it. I, again, said before that, Jeb Bush, was my candidate 4 years ago, and I said Donald Trump got, less votes than everybody else combined. Well, yes, maybe Bernie Sanders does have less votes than everybody else combined, but that also doesn't necessarily mean that he's not going to be the nominee, and that means his ideologies, end up carrying the day. Right,
and one thing we can learn from the election of President Trump is you can never underestimate populist fervor, right? Whichever direction it may lead. All right, so, Joseph, the Trump re-election campaign has repeatedly told CBS News that they don't care which Democrat gets the nomination. But as a Republican strategist, are there some candidates you would rather go up against than others?
I mean, look, I think if you're looking at the kind of juxtaposition between President Trump and socialism, on paper, that looks great. Again, I think that you have to be vigilant with somebody like Bernie Sanders because he does have a movement in a way that somebody like Elizabeth Warren does not have a movement. But I think that when you look at somebody like that, we look at somebody like Pete Buttigieg with a rather anemic record, I think that those are comparisons that lend themselves well to President Trump, who can sit there and talk about 6 million new jobs, who can talk about 401ks reaching historic levels. Those are things that Democrats, in spite of their opposition to Trump, haven't actually found any actual answer for when it comes to what is it going to be about our administration that'll be better for you economically than it is with President Trump.
All right, so Michael, it is likely that former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg will qualify for next week's debate in Las Vegas now that those rules have been changed a bit. But some have raised the idea that he may not want to attend, given that up to this point he's largely been able to shape his own message through advertising and surrogates. So do you think it's beneficial for Michael Bloomberg to participate in the debate, or is it better to keep himself at a remove?
So I think him appearing on the debate stage is going to be a real problem for him. You know, Amy Klobuchar's campaign already telegraphed that she wants him on the stage so that she can go after him and kind of hold him accountable for his record. And so I think he's been fortunate. Fortunate's kind of an interesting word to use, just because I think he planned to not be on the debate stage because he knew that people would be going after him. And the higher he goes up in the polls, the more other campaigns are going to go after him.
You're not the only one to say that. I mean, I wish we could get to the root of the matter here and find out for sure. But Joseph, we know that President Trump will also be heading to Nevada next week for 2 days before the Democratic caucuses. So what is behind this habit of visiting the states right before the caucuses or the primary?
Well, I think, again, it's great television. It gives America a great snapshot. This is what's going on our side of the aisle, and this is what's going on the side of the Democrats. And I think, again, right now, you have Democrats handing out, participation trophies. I mean, you had an Iowa caucus that's worked perfectly since 1972, and they, for reasons passing understanding, decided that they wanted to completely upend the process just to make people feel good. And so, again, when you put that in the context of somebody like Joe Biden, a former VP who has gone from 4th to 5th, really trying to find his mojo in places like Nevada and South Carolina, where black voters are starting to try to hit the buy it now button on a new candidate because they no longer believe that he is the person that can go toe to toe, that he has that winning patina about him. So, look, I think President Trump is engaged in a smart strategy, and I think thus far it seems like it's serving him well if you look at the turnout in New Hampshire.
So, Michael, I just want to piggyback on what Joseph was saying there. Do you think that a lot of the African-American support behind Biden was simply because they thought he was the best man to win, in a contest against Trump, or did it go deeper than that?
Well, I mean, he's a known commodity, having been the vice president for our country's first African-American president. But I do think his support among African-American communities is soft. And we're seeing that now with the polling numbers for Michael Bloomberg. Bloomberg's support among African-American community has doubled in the last 2 weeks. And that's while being attacked for stop and frisk and some of the redlining policies that they've been talking about this week. So I think Biden's big problem is when you cement your campaign on electability, well, when you start losing primaries, it's no longer able to have that same argument. And so he's having those cracks.
So but let's keep with that, Michael. Let's talk a little bit more about those attacks on Michael Bloomberg. The former Republican turned Democratic presidential candidate is being criticized for the expansion of stop and frisk, that police program that disproportionately targeted Black and Hispanic New Yorkers, as well as some recently revealed comments where he blamed the end of discriminatory lending, known as redlining, for the 2008 housing crash. So, Michael, it's been 6 years since Bloomberg left the mayor's office. How is his record holding up under a national spotlight?
So let me start off by saying I was actually a public defender in Manhattan during some of the stop and frisk years. So I uniquely understand the effect that it had on the African-American community. And I think that that's something that Michael Bloomberg is going to have to atone for over the next months or so. But, Bloomberg has been very intentional in the fact that he has donated to causes like Moms Demand Action. He's donated to climate change different groups. He's made sure that Democrats retain the House majority. So, Bloomberg's record's complicated, and it's something he's going to have to explain and atone for. But I think Democrats need to be very careful in this kind of circular firing squad that they're using against him, because at the end of the day, he is the safety valve for Democrats. And so we need to be able to have a candidate we can put up against Trump. And I am pretty confident that Michael Bloomberg could beat President Trump.
So, Joseph, keeping with the theme of Michael Bloomberg, he's changed parties a couple of times. He started out as a Republican, then became an independent. Now he's a Democrat. Is that something that would give Republicans ammunition against him?
No, I think, again, we're living in, we are a deeply divided nation. We are a deeply partisan nation. But I think to view candidates through a partisan prism, particularly like Bloomberg or President Trump, does us a great disservice. Again, people remember, yes, he was a Republican before he was a Democrat, but he was a Democrat before he was a Republican. And again, so there's many hours of footage of Republicans trying to remind people that Donald Trump has given millions upon millions of dollars to Democratic causes, and it didn't help. And I think now when you look at the inverse right now with somebody like Mike Bloomberg, who has clearly cemented his Democratic bona fides when they talk about moms demanding action for gun violence, when you start talking about climate change and all these other issues. So he's clearly put his money where his mouth is on things that Democrats care about, and I don't think those attacks are going to really move the needle with the people who are looking to support him.
And so could his past then as a Republican or an independent actually make him more attractive to moderate Republican voters who might be looking for an alternative to President Trump?
Well, I think you could have made that argument until impeachment came. And so I think, again, Democrats had the opposite intended effect. So I think what they were trying to do was weaken President Trump. They threw everything they had at him for 3 years. It only made him stronger. And actually, it seems like it cannibalized Joe Biden's campaign in the process. So I think, again, yes, there is some type of independent maverick appeal to somebody like Bloomberg. But when it comes down to, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago, and trying to juxtapose that with the type of incoming that Bloomberg has on his own side of the aisle and trying to rebuild that fractured Democratic coalition, I don't think it's going to work.
All right. Joseph Pinion and Michael Starr Hopkins, thanks to both of you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.